Hello there, friend. I'm truly grateful you've decided to spend your time watching this video. And if you happen to hit that subscribe button, just know, it would mean a great deal to me. So let's jump right in. I'm Cooper, and today I want to tell you about the moment my wife went away on a solo vacation, only to return and find that I was no longer there. I hadn't left in anger or after some explosive argument. No, this was the slow fading of something once beautiful, eroded by silence, missed chances, and dreams that quietly dissolved over time. My wife, Crystal, and I had been married for several years before things began to unravel. We first met back in college, bright-eyed and full of ambition. After we graduated, we got married, like so many young couples do, filled with hope and a shared vision of the future. We dreamed of a cozy house, kids running through the yard, lazy Sunday barbecues, surrounded by loved ones. We moved into a simple 3-bedroom rental in a quiet neighborhood, already making space in our minds and hearts for the children we believed would soon arrive. The backyard was fenced in, perfect for the kind of life we were planning. Crystal would frequently scroll through home listings online, showing me houses with room for a big family, always talking about what could be. About a year into our marriage, we began trying to conceive. The first pregnancy didn't last long. The doctor assured us it was more common than we realized and not necessarily cause for alarm. She took some personal time off work to process it, and we grieved that loss together. I believed we had faced it as one, emerging even stronger. We waited the appropriate amount of time and tried again. But the second miscarriage hit her like a wave. After that, the excited conversations about baby names vanished. She stopped scrolling through real estate listings. Any talk of building a family just stopped. Still, she hadn't completely retreated. She'd laugh during our favorite shows, still held my hand when we went for walks, still smiled at familiar jokes. There was warmth between us, and I convinced myself that all she needed was a little more time to heal. Then came the third loss, this time well into the pregnancy. We had already shared the news. Her sister had even picked out baby clothes. So when we lost that child, it didn't just devastate us. It rippled through the entire family. People didn't know what to say. That loss marked a shift. Crystal began to emotionally check out. She stopped starting conversations altogether. When I tried to engage her, she answered with disinterest or flat indifference. And if I gently tried to dig deeper, she'd twist my words or lash out. Eventually, I started walking on eggshells in my own house. I'd come home from work and find she wasn't there, out with friends. Sometimes she left a quick note, out with the girls, seeing a movie, don't wait up. At first, I was relieved she had people around her, but days turned into weeks, and those nights out grew more frequent, while whatever connection we had quietly slipped away. 3, sometimes 4 evenings a week, she wasn't home. Weekends became hers to spend however she wanted, and I was left wondering whether this was just a phase. Maybe she needed distance to remember we were in this together. But it continued. For more than a year, I came home to an empty house. I shared a bed with someone who no longer reached for me. I tried everything I could think of during those 2 years. I suggested therapy. She immediately dismissed the idea, saying she didn't see the point in telling strangers about our personal lives. I planned surprise dates. She agreed to come, but barely interacted, more focused on her phone than on me, giving short, disengaged answers. I tried giving her space, hoping it might reignite something between us. But all it did was make the distance grow. I even tried to spend time with her circle of friends, thinking maybe a shared social life would help bring us closer again. But whenever I joined them, I felt like a stranger. It became clear they barely tolerated me. In their eyes, I wasn't her partner. I was the burden, the one holding her back. So I buried myself in my job. I stayed at the office longer, took on extra work, even thought about applying for a role that required frequent travel. When I mentioned it to her, she didn't even look away from her screen. The holidays during that time were the hardest. To the outside world, we still looked like a loving couple. We smiled for pictures, laughed when it was expected, played our roles. Crystal was good at pretending, but the moment we were alone in the car, the silence returned as heavy as ever. Sometimes I felt like she held me responsible for our inability to have children. One Christmas, I gave her a necklace she had admired in a shop window months earlier. She opened the box, muttered a quiet thanks, and set it aside without ever wearing it. Weeks later, I found the unopened box still sitting on her dresser. Eventually, I tucked it into a drawer myself. That necklace became a quiet symbol of what we'd lost. A gesture that once might have meant something, but now carried no weight, because the man giving it no longer meant anything to her. But even more painful than the silence was the disdain. When she did speak to me, it was in a way that left no doubt. She no longer respected me. If I asked to spend time together, she'd roll her eyes. She'd make dismissive comments about my job, my friends, even my personality. I kept hoping it would pass, so I bit my tongue. But the more I stayed silent, the worse it got. At some point, she stopped pretending altogether. She'd cut me off mid-sentence, ridicule my ideas, and talk to me like I was just an inconvenience she had to tolerate. That's when something inside me started to break. I stopped putting in effort. I no longer asked how her day had gone, didn't bother making plans, didn't try to have real conversations unless they were about the bills or daily tasks, and she seemed fine with that. In fact, she looked relieved. We slipped into a routine of quiet coexistence, civil, detached. It was as if the house had become a set, and we were two actors playing out separate scripts. I'd wake up early and head out before she even stirred. She'd come home long after I'd eaten and settled in. Weekends were no different. I kept myself busy with chores, tinkering in the garage, or just sitting alone with my thoughts. She'd claim the living room for herself, or disappear for the day. Our exchanges had dwindled down to pure logistics. Scraps of paper on the kitchen counter reminded us whose turn it was to restock the fridge or when the next bill needed paying. The only texts between us were about malfunctioning Wi-Fi, a dripping faucet, or coordinating family visits for the upcoming holidays. It felt like we had become the most efficient pair of emotionally detached housemates possible. Her job schedule kept changing. More late nights, more last-minute weekend crises. I couldn't tell anymore if she was genuinely overwhelmed or just inventing reasons to avoid being home. The most disorienting part was how easily this emotional void settled into place. After months spent carefully navigating her moods and trying not to upset an already fragile peace, the numbness began to feel like a strange kind of comfort. No more expectations meant no more arguments. No more hope meant nothing left to be crushed. We had fallen into a rhythm that asked for nothing beyond courtesy and shared rent. During those final months, the idea of divorce stopped feeling like a threat and started to seem like a reasonable way out. Not because I was angry, but because I could finally see the truth. Our marriage had become a shell, legally intact, but spiritually vacant. She had already moved on, I just hadn't caught up. Then one evening I returned home to find an unsettling quiet. Her car wasn't in the driveway, not unusual, but what caught my eye was a note on the counter, written in her unmistakable script. Just a few sentences. She wrote that she needed to get away to figure things out. She was going on a solo trip, no mention of where or for how long. She asked me not to contact her, said she needed the space. There was no apology, no acknowledgement that leaving without a word might call for a conversation. Just that short note. I read it twice, then sat down at the kitchen table, stunned. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. My wife had essentially run off, and the way she told me was no different than if she'd stepped out for milk. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept spinning through memories of the past couple of years. The countless nights I'd sat in that same house, aching for her to remember that we were supposed to be in this together. That's when it finally hit me. I had been holding on to something that had long since crumbled, clinging to the outline of a partnership she'd already abandoned. By the time the sun came up, I was resolved. If she wanted distance, I'd give her exactly that. I grabbed my laptop and began hunting for apartments. Based on what she'd taken, I guessed I had about a month before she returned. Finding a place proved harder than expected. I was looking for something small, a one-bedroom, somewhere about 20 minutes away. Close enough to keep my job and routine, but far enough to avoid bumping into her at the grocery store. While I browsed rental listings, I also began researching divorce attorneys. Eventually, I landed on one with strong reviews and a downtown office. The initial consultation was matter of fact. I told the lawyer my wife had left with no warning and that we'd basically been strangers under one roof for years. I said I was ready to end it. He asked the usual questions. Any children, joint assets, debts? The answers were simple: no kids, separate accounts, no house, just a rental, very little shared property. His name was Howard. He explained that Colorado law includes a mandatory waiting period after filing to allow for possible reconciliation. But, he added, given her unexplained departure and complete lack of communication, it would be easy to demonstrate that reconciliation wasn't realistic. Within a week, he had the paperwork ready. By the third week of her absence, with no apartment secured, I checked into a hotel nearby. Packing the house felt surreal. Even though I'd spent years living there, walking through each room made it painfully clear how little of it had ever been mine. She had chosen nearly everything: the furniture, the color of the walls, the artwork. Night after night, I boxed up my belongings piece by piece. Each room felt like a timeline of our slow erosion. In the closet, my side had slowly been overtaken by her things. In the bathroom, there was barely a trace of me. Even in the kitchen, signs of our disconnect were everywhere. My old coffee maker sat in a corner, unused. I had started going out for coffee just to avoid the heavy silence of our mornings. Some items made me hesitate. A framed photo from our wedding day. Was there any reason to hold on to it? The old toolbox she gave me years ago, still mostly untouched. A handful of children's books we once picked out together, dreaming of a future we never reached. In the end, I left most of it behind. Those items belonged to people we no longer were. Saying goodbye to the garage was the hardest. In the final stretch of our relationship, it had become my sanctuary, a quiet space where I could organize tools, fix things, or just be alone without feeling like an intruder. Dismantling my workbench felt like dismantling the last piece of the house that truly felt like mine. I hired movers to bring my things to a nearby storage unit. I didn't touch any of her belongings. I left them exactly as she'd arranged them. I only took what was clearly mine. The hardest moment came when I placed my house key on the counter. That tiny piece of metal felt heavier than anything I'd boxed up. It symbolized years of shared routines, lost intimacy, and the final close of something that had already been fading for years. A 2-year drift that ended not with a fight, but with the quiet click of a key being left behind. A week after I left, she came back, right on cue. I know this because my lawyer heard from the process server that the divorce papers had been delivered. A woman matching her description had answered the door and accepted them without a word. Later that evening, she called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but in the end, I picked up. I figured I at least owed her that much. As soon as I answered, she launched into her version of things. She talked about how refreshing the trip had been, how the time away helped her gain perspective. Then she brought up the divorce papers, as if they were some kind of mistake, like it had all come out of nowhere. She demanded to understand why I'd filed for divorce without a conversation, why I'd left the house without warning, and why I was reacting so severely to what she considered a temporary pause. I let her get it all out, without interrupting. And when she finished, I told her what she didn't expect. She was right. The break had served its purpose. But not only for her. It had forced me to confront something I'd been refusing to admit, that I'd been trying to breathe life back into a relationship that had already expired. I explained that we'd both been unhappy for a long time, and no brief separation was enough to reverse the emotional distance that had taken root. The kindest decision left was to acknowledge the truth and make our split official. She didn't respond right away. There was a long, heavy silence. Then she ended the call. A few hours later, she texted me. She asked if there was still hope, if counseling might work, or if we could try another pause instead of a permanent goodbye. Reading her message, I felt a flicker, faint, familiar, of wondering if maybe, just maybe, we could reclaim what we once had. But reality cut through quickly. I thought about the last 2 years, about all the meals I ate alone while she enjoyed her freedom elsewhere, about how her words turned cold, cutting, as if my presence was just another inconvenience. And more than anything, I thought about how it took total solitude for her to even remember I might still matter. She had to be far away from me to recognize any remaining value in what we had. And that, in itself, told me everything I needed to know. I never replied. Some conversations don't need continuations. Some questions deserve silence, not answers. For 2 years, she'd made it abundantly clear, through words, actions, and indifference, exactly what our relationship meant to her. The divorce itself dragged on for months. In Colorado, the law includes a mandatory waiting period, just in case couples change their minds. She reached out a few more times during that gap, once through her sister Elizabeth, then again through mutual friends who believed a single heartfelt talk might fix everything. I didn't engage. I had said all I needed to during that one call. She wasn't looking for closure. She wanted control, the same kind she had always exercised over our dynamic. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. I no longer sought her attention. In fact, I began to breathe easier. My life felt more peaceful, more grounded, freer, without the exhausting task of keeping something alive that had already decayed. I reconnected with friends she'd disapproved of, dove into passions she used to ridicule, expressed thoughts she'd never cared to hear. The divorce was finalized after several months. My lawyer called to say the judge had signed the paperwork. She didn't contest a single thing, not the finances, not the legalities, not even the final goodbye. She simply let it pass. It's now been a full year since then, and I can say this without a shred of doubt. Her solo vacation was the best thing that ever happened to our marriage. Not because it mended us, but because it gave us both the freedom we needed from something long dead. She found the space she'd been subconsciously seeking, and I finally saw clearly what I hadn't wanted to admit while clinging to memories of what used to be. People sometimes ask if I miss being married, if I ever wonder whether I gave up too soon. My answer isn't simple. I do miss the version of her I fell in love with in the beginning. I miss the dreams we built, the future we painted together. But I don't long for what we became. Two people living side by side in name only. She asked for a break, and I gave her one, with no return date. By the time she was ready to reconnect, I was already gone. Not just physically from our house, but emotionally from the part of me that tolerated being invisible in my own life. I've come to understand that sometimes, real love means choosing not to keep offering yourself in a form the other person no longer values. She needed space. I needed self-respect. She walked away emotionally long before that trip. I just made the separation permanent once she came back. And that's where the story ends. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to check out more content on the channel. Be well, my friend. Until next time.